Perrin, that in a slightly different way describes the same phenomenon, that is to say, the king allying himself with the lower classes, with the sub-noble classes, so to speak, in order to break the power of the competing aristocracy, of those people who would lose the most, so to speak, from the fact that the king acquires a monopoly. Pirenne there says, the clear interest of the monarchy was to support the adversaries of high feudalism. That is, the adversaries of the noble class, of the aristocracy. Naturally, help was given whenever it was possible to do so without becoming obligated to, in this case he talks about the cities, the king in particular also inciting the inhabitants of cities to rise against the nobility. Whenever it was possible to do so without becoming obligated to the middle classes, who in arising against their lords fought to all intents and purposes in the interests of royal prerogatives. To accept the king as arbitrator of their quarrel was, for the parties in conflict, to recognize his sovereignty. The entry of the burghers upon the political scene had as a consequence the weakening of the contractual principle of the feudal state to the advantage of the principle of the authority of the monarchical state. It was impossible that royalty should not take count of this and seize every chance to show its goodwill to the communes and also to the peasants and so forth, without intending to do so, the communes and the peasants, who, without intending to do so, labored so successfully in its own behalf. Now, but this is, of course, only the first step. You create the crisis. The noble class comes to you, wants to be rescued, and you rescue them in exchange for them granting you exclusive judgeship rights. You have to offer something, of course, in addition to the aristocracy. What is typically offered is that the aristocracy now plays some particularly important role in the slowly developing royal bureaucracy that will be established. But more than this, you need, of course, now an ideology. Again, recall, without ideological support for this institution is not going to last for very long. And the ideology that is created and that is still with us to this day is the so-called Hobbesian myth. That is the idea that the normal state of mankind is precisely this war of all against all, which the king deliberately brought about. And that in order to stop this war of all against all, it is necessary that there must be one single monopolist ruling over all people in order to create peace. Now, if you ask yourself, if you ask all around people, ask them, why do we need a state? Almost everyone will give you exactly this reason. Without a single monopolist, there would be permanent war of all against all. This is the belief that maintains up to this day a state apparatus. This is what practically believes. I have asked my own students at times, and that was the answer that everyone gave. Without the state, of course, there would be chaos. There would be no cooperation. There must be a single monopolist. This is the ideology that keeps the state in place. Now, let me only point out this at this moment. You can quickly realize the weakness of this ideology if you do two things. On the one hand, imagine what this means if you have very small groups of people. That is, two individuals. So what this theory essentially says is no two people can ever peacefully cooperate with each other. That would always lead of war one against the other. There must be always a master, and there must be always someone who is subject to the master. You realize if you just use a very small group of people, immediately how absurd this thesis becomes. We have 5 people. Is it necessary for 5 people that there must be one who is the monopolist in every possible conflict, including conflicts involving himself with the other 4? For these small groups, most people would immediately say, you must be crazy to believe this sort of stuff. That can never be true. Because you know groups of this size who peacefully cooperate all the time. Nonetheless, this is one of the implications. What you recognize here is that they never talk, so to speak, about the size of the territory. And on the other hand, you recognize that if this theory is true, then of course it must be the case that we must have a world state in order to create peace. Because the same argument applies, of course, to a situation where we have a multitude of states. If we have a multitude of states, then these various states are in a state of anarchy, of natural order vis-à-vis each other, and allegedly there must be permanent war among them. Now, this is also obviously not the case. There are wars among them, and I will explain why there are more wars among states than there are wars among individuals, so to speak, in the next one of my next lectures. But it is certainly not the case that states are permanently at war against each other. So what remains entirely unexplained here, and what is somehow taken intuitively for granted, is that we are talking about sizes of states where it is not perfectly clear immediately that, of course, these people would peacefully cooperate with each other. But the size of states are in a way arbitrary. Why should not be a state have the size of, whatever, a small village? In a small village, we have not the slightest difficulty imagining that there is peaceful cooperation going on without a monopolist. Only when the size becomes a little bit bigger, then we become increasingly blinder, so to speak, to recognizing that at all times, of course, the same principle